I love making quirky lids, and today's is a first for me. I'm making a swivel lid. That's a lid that rotates to open and close. You can also lift the lid off for easy loading and cleaning. Let me show you how it's made. I'm using 1.5 kilos of clay for the pot, and then another 800 grams of clay for the lid, 600 for the rotating disc, and 300 for the rim. I'm starting with the pot, which is the base. So I center the clay, and then I flatten the clay to the width of the pot. And then I push down into the clay and open out. I open out with a flat base. This is a very simple, straight-sided pot. And I bring up the walls. Now, if you've watched many of our videos, you know how the next bit goes. So it's a good time to remind you to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and definitely leave a comment if there's something you'd like to see made, or if you have a question. This is how we can build our channel and keep making these videos. And I straighten. I trim around the base. I take the measurement. This will be important for the next part. I wire through and then set aside to dry to leather hard. So now we're on to the lid, and the first part of the lid is making a flat tray. The tray is going to fit inside the base with a little extra room. And now I push down into the clay and bring a little of the clay out to make quite a low wall, about 7 mm. And now, before I forget, I want to make a small raised mound in the middle of this tray. So I push a little of that clay back in. This mound is very small. It's only going to be about 2 mm high. It's this peak of clay that will allow the lid to swivel. Make sure that the rest of the tray is truly flat. So now I'm making the rotating disc, the part that opens and closes. I center my clay, and I flatten into a disc that's at least 1 centimetre less than the size of the inner part of the tray. That is, it's going to fit in that tray with about 5 mm on either side. I make a slight indent in the centre that I hope will correspond with the peak of clay in the tray. I also want to make sure that the clay gently tapers down to the edges. And now for the rim. The rim is a flat ring of clay, much like a washer. So I've centered and then I flatten the clay. Now I push down all the way through to the bat and I bring out a donut of clay. It needs to sit over the rim of the pot and also covers part of the swivel lid, otherwise the swivel lid will slide off. And I measure to make sure it's a few mil larger than the rim of the base. I've dried all the pieces to leather hard. So it's time to trim and assemble the parts. I've made a template of the cutout for both the swivel lid and the tray. You could get pretty creative here, but I'm keeping it simple, and I think this shape will have a bit of a retro feel. It's giving me the vibe of a spice shaker. I cut with a sharp knife. And I set aside to firm up a little more. Now for the tray. I do the same. Now, I'm assuming you've measured and all your pieces fit. It's worth checking at this point and making sure the tray actually does fit in the base. And the same for the swiveling disc. If you have to, you can still trim those parts down now. Okay, before we start assembling, I'm going to coat the tray part of the lid with underglaze. I'm not going to be able to add any glaze to this area. Otherwise, the spinning disc would be glazed to the lid. So the underglaze will have to do. I'll give it 2 or 3 coats. Now I'm ready to assemble. I'll start by scoring and slipping the base of that rim. This rim is going to hold that spinning disc in place and it's going to fit over the container's rim. Now I score and slip the rim of the lid. And now I place the rotating disc onto the lid. I place it with a slight indent downwards to match that peak. And now I add the rim. I give it a slight jiggle to join. You could also add a coil of clay. And then I set aside to dry slowly before bisque firing separately. So the first time I made this, I fired them together and the lid cracked, so I had to make it again. I start the glazing by dipping the base. And for the lid, I'm glazing with a brush-on glaze on top of the underglaze. I carefully glaze the rotating disc, being sure to keep the glaze away from the rim. I use paper to protect the parts of the lid that are to remain unglazed. Once glazed, I fire in the kiln. And let's check this out, a swiveling lid. There's nothing to set up. I just put the lid on and really hope I don't hear that scrape of clay on clay. So if you're going to attempt this project, you're going to have to work through things like getting the pieces dry enough so they don't misshape, yet still wet enough to join, working out which parts of the lid you can glaze. But for all of the problems you might encounter, pieces with moving parts are so satisfying to make. And if you're finding this video interesting, why don't you try out the hype button? It's a surefire way to keep us motivated to create more videos. And be sure to check out our other original ideas, including my swing top pot. And as always, happy potting.